In this video, we are going to see Class 8 History, Chapter 3, Ruling the Countryside. Before we get into this chapter, we have to see about the hierarchy of the countryside. So there are various systems which are being introduced by the East India Company. The first one is the permanent settlement, which focuses about the zamindars. The next is the Mahalwari system, which focuses on the senior member called the village headman. Ryotwari system focuses on villages called ryots. Above all, we have superpower called the Britishers. So if you see the right hand side, there is a pop-up where the permanent settlement was being introduced in Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. Ryotwari system introduced in South India and Mahalwari system was introduced in Northwest India. So we saw in the previous chapter that the East India Company getting the Diwani rights from the Mughal Emperor. So on 12th August 1765, the Mughal Emperor appointed the East India Company as the Diwan of the Bengal. So this Diwani of Bengal rights was issued to the East India Company in the Robert Clive's tent. But if you see the picture above, this is where the Robert Clive accepting the Diwani of Bengal. So this was a painting which was being done showing as if a majestic occasion happened and took place in a grand setting. The painter was commissioned by Clive to record the memorable events in the Clive's life. The grant of Diwani clearly was one such event in British imagination. East India Company as Diwan, the company has lot of responsibilities, becoming the chief financial administrator of the territory under its control. Now it had to think of administering the land and organizing its revenue and resources. The trading company had also to ensure that it could buy the products it needed and sell what it wanted. So over the years, the company learned that it had to move with some caution. So East India being an alien power, it needed to pacify those who were ruling in the past in the countryside. The meaning of pacify is to calm down the old rulers who were ruling the countryside and who enjoyed the authority and prestige. Those who held the local power had to be controlled, but they could not be entirely eliminated. Now let's see how was this to be done. So in this chapter we will see how the company came to colonize the countryside, organize revenue resources, redefine the rights of the people and produce the crops it wanted. The next topic is revenue for the company. The company became the Diwan, but it still saw itself primarily as a trader. The main aim of the East India Company is to have a large revenue income, but was unwilling to set up any regular system of assessment and collection. So it wanted the revenue income, but there was no proper system of collecting the taxes and system of assessment was not available. The effort was to increase the revenue as much as it could and buy fine cotton and silk cloth as cheaply as possible. So this was the main aim of the company. Within 5 years, the value of goods bought by the company in Bengal doubled. Before 1865, the East India Company was depending on the Britain government in order to purchase the goods in India by importing the gold and silver from the Britain. Now, the revenue which was collected in Bengal was enough for financing the purchase of goods for export. So it is very clear that the Bengal economy was facing a deep crisis. So artisans were deserting the villages since they were being forced to sell their goods to the company at the low prices. The local peasants were unable to pay the dues that were being demanded from them. Then in 1770, a terrible famine killed 10 million people in Bengal. So because of this famine, about 1/3 of the population was wiped out. As we saw, the economy of Bengal was in deep crisis, the economy was in ruin and the company could not be certain of the revenue income. The most company officials began to feel that the investment in land had to be encouraged and agriculture had to be improved. So now the East India Company is taking the various steps to improve the agriculture. Let's see how was this to be done. After 2 decades of debate on the question, the company finally introduced the permanent settlement in the year 1793. So by the term permanent settlement, it had lot of conditions and criterias. The Rajas and Talukdars were recognized as Zamindars. They were asked to collect rent from the peasants and pay revenue to the company. The amount which was being paid was fixed permanently, that it was not to be increased in the future. It was felt that this would ensure a regular flow of revenue into the company's coffer. Coffer is nothing but like a treasure box. And at the same time encourage the zamindars to invest in improving the land. Since the revenue demand of the state would not be increased, the zamindar would benefit from increased production from the land. But this system was facing some problem. Those who failed to pay tax lost zamindari and land was sold in auction to the company. In first decade 19th century, the price of market rose and cultivation expanded, but there was no gain for the company. So the local villagers found this system as very oppressive, that means very burden, as they have to pay very high rent. Then a new system was devised. By the early 19th century, many of the company officials were convinced that the system of revenue had to be changed again. How could revenues be fixed permanently at a time when the company needed more money to meet its expenses of administration and trade? So, what they did was, in northwestern provinces of the Bengal Presidency, an Englishman called Holt Mackenzie devised this new system which came into effect in 1822. He felt that the village was an important social institution in North Indian society and needed to be preserved. So, under his direction, the collectors went from village to village, inspecting the land, measuring the fields, and recording the customs and rights of different groups. The estimated revenue of each plot within a village was added up to calculate the revenue that each village is called as a mahal, had to pay. This demand was to be revised periodically, not permanently fixed. The charge of collecting the revenue and paying it to the company was given to the village headman rather than to the zamindars as we saw in the permanent settlement. This system came to be known as the Mahalwari settlement. So before we see the next system called the Munro system or the Ryotwari system, we can see who is this Thomas Munro. He was a governor of Madras in the period 1819 to 26. He was a Scottish soldier and colonial administrator. He was an East Indian Company army officer and statesman. He served with his regiment during the hard-fought war against Hyder Ali in the period 1780 to 83, serving under his older and distant relation Major Sir Hector Munro. Munro system or Ryotwari system. In the British territories in the south, there was a similar move away from the idea of permanent settlement. The new system that was devised came to be known as the Ryotwar or Ryotwari system. It was tried on a small scale by Captain Alexander Red in some of the areas that were taken over by the company after the war with Tipu Sultan. Subsequently, Thomas Munro gradually extended this system all over South India. The settlement, they argued, had to be made directly with the cultivators, that is the ryots, who had tilled the land for generations. Tilled the land in the sense the owning of the land, the farming and all those things being done by the local people. Their fields had to be carefully and separately surveyed before the revenue assessment was made. So Munro thought that British should act as a paternal father figure protecting the ryots under their charge. But all was not well. Within few years after the new systems was imposed, it was clear that all was not well with them. Driven by the desire to increase the income from land, revenue officials fixed too high revenue demand. Peasants were unable to pay, ryots fled the countryside, that is, they move out of the place, and villages become deserted in many regions. Optimistic officials imagined that new systems would transform the peasants into rich enterprising farmers. But these systems did not work out and this did not happen. Later on, the Britishers forced the cultivators to produce the various crops which was being required for the European countries. The British also realized that the countryside could not only yield revenue, it could also grow the crops that Europe required. By the late 18th century, the company was trying its best to expand the cultivation of opium and indigo in the century and a half that followed. The British persuaded or forced cultivators in various parts of India to produce other crops like jute in Bengal, tea in Assam, sugarcane in United Provinces, wheat in Punjab, cotton in Maharashtra and Punjab, rice in Madras. But how was this done? The British used a variety of methods to expand the cultivation of crops that they needed. So let's take a closer look at the story of one such crop, one such method of production. The cultivation of opium in indigo is nothing but a color dye which is being used. So let's see whether the color has a story. If you look at this picture in the figure number 5 and 6 are the two images of the cotton print. One is the Kalamkari print which is being created in the 20th century, who is being viewed by the Andhra Pradesh people. On the right hand side you can see the Morris cotton print designed by and produced by William Morris, a famous poet and artist of 19th century. So if you look at these two pictures, there is a common in the two print. Both use a rich blue color commonly called indigo. Do you know how this color was produced? The blue that you see in these prints was produced from a plant called indigo. It is likely that the blue dye used in the Morris print in the 19th century, Britain manufactured from indigo plants cultivated in India. For India was the biggest supplier of indigo in the world at that time. Now let us see why there is a demand for the Indian indigo. The indigo plant grows primarily in the tropics. By the 13th century, Indian indigo was being used by the cloth manufacturers in Italy, France and Britain to dye the cloth. However, only small amount of Indian indigo reached the European market and its price was very high. The European cloth manufacturers therefore had to depend on another plant called oud to make violet and blue dye. Being a plant of the temperate zone, oud was more easily available in Europe. It was grown in northern Italy, southern France and in parts of Germany and Britain. But they were worried by the competition from indigo. Oud producers in Europe pressurized their government to ban the import of indigo from India. Cloth dyers, however, preferred indigo as a dye. Indigo produced a rich blue color, whereas the dye from oud was pale and dull. By the 17th century, European cloth producers persuaded the government to relax the ban on indigo import. So the French began cultivating indigo in Saint Domingue in the Caribbean island, the Portuguese in Brazil, the English in Jamaica. By the end of the 18th century, the demand for indigo grew further. Britain began to industrialize and its cotton production expanded dramatically, creating an enormous new demand for the cloth dye. Between 1783 and 1789, the production of indigo in the world fell by the half. Cloth dyers in Britain now desperately looked for new sources of indigo supply. From where could this indigo be produced? So now the East India Company is turning back to India. Faced with the rising demand for indigo in Europe, the company in India looked for ways to expand the area under indigo cultivation. From the last decade of the 18th century, indigo cultivation in Bengal expanded rapidly and Bengal indigo came to dominate the world market. In 1788, only about 30% of the indigo was imported to Britain, which was from India. By 1810, the proportion had gone from 30% to 95%. Over the years, many company officials left their jobs to look after their indigo businesses. Company was giving loan to produce indigo. Now, let's see how the indigo was cultivated. There were two main systems of indigo cultivation. The first one is NIJ cultivation and Rioti cultivation. NIG cultivation. The planter produced indigo in lands that he directly controlled. That means the cultivation was directly done on the local riots land. Indigo can be cultivated only on fertile areas, but these were already densely populated. Only small plots could be acquired. They attempted to lease in the land and around the indigo factory and evict the peasants from the area. But this always led to conflicts and tension because the local peasants were farming the local crops. As the East India Company was forcing the people to cultivate indigo, it reflected the conflict and tension. A large plantation was required with vast number of hands to operate, and labor was needed precisely at a time when peasants were usually busy with their rice cultivation. This energy cultivation on a large scale required many plows and bullocks. That is, 1 bighha of indigo cultivation required 2 plows. Bighha is a unit of measurement of land. Before the British rule, the size of this area varied. In Bengal, the British standardized it to about 1/3 of an acre. So, its bighha is a measurement of land. Till the late 19th century, planters were therefore reluctant to expand the area under energy cultivation. So, less than 25% of the land producing indigo was under this system. The rest was under an alternative mode of cultivation called the Rioti system. Let's see the indigo on the land of Riots. Under the Rioti system, planters forced the Riots to sign a contract and agreement called Satta. At times, they pressurized the village headmen to sign the contract on behalf of the Riots. So, those who are signing the contract get the cash advances from the planters and at low rate of interest to produce the indigo. But the loan which was committed the Riot to cultivate indigo on at least 25% of the area under his holding. The planter provided the seed and the drill, while the cultivators prepared the soil, sowed the seed, and looked after the crop. Let's see how indigo was produced. So this is an indigo factory picture which we can see now. And this is a factory which has been located near the indigo field. To produce this indigo, there are various steps we can see one by one. In the figure number 11, you can see indigo villages usually around the indigo factories owned by the planters. In figure number 12, after harvest, the indigo plant was taken to the vats standing with the paddle that was used to stir the solution were needed to manufacture the dye. Vats is nothing but a fermenting or a storage vessel. Over 8 years, each vat had a separate function. The leaves stripped off the indigo plant were first soaked in warm water in a vat known as the fermenting or steeper vat for several hours. When the plants fermented, the liquid began to boil and bubble. The rotten leaves were taken out and the liquid drained into another vat that was placed just below the first vat. In the second vat, known as the beater vat, the solution was continuously stirred and beaten up with paddles. When the liquid gradually turned green and blue, lime water is added to the vat. Gradually, the indigo separated out in flakes, a muddy sediment settled at the bottom of the vat, and a clear liquid rose to the surface. The liquid was drained off and the indigo pulp transferred to another vat known as the settling vat, and then pressed and dried for sale. In figure number 11, we can see the women carrying the indigo plant to the vats. In figure number 12, the vat beater, the indigo worker here is standing with the paddle that was used to stir the solution in the vat. These workers had to remain in waist deep water for over 8 hours to beat the indigo solution. Figure number 13, the indigo is ready for sale. Here you can see the last stage of the production. The workers stamping and cutting the indigo pulp that has been pressed and molded. In the background, you can see a worker carrying away the blocks for drying. The next is an important topic, the Blue Rebellion and after. In March 1859, thousands of riots in Bengal refused to grow indigo. As the rebellion spread, riots refused to pay rents to the planters and attacked indigo factories. Those who worked for planters were socially boycotted, and gomastas, they are called the agents of planters, who came to collect the rent, were beaten up. Indigo system was very oppressive. Riots had to support the local zamindars and village headmen and fought with lathials. Lathi is nothing but wielding a strong men maintained by the planters. The Britishers were worried about another rebellion after 1857. When in Barasat, Magistrate Ashley Eden issued a notice stating that riots would not be compelled to accept the indigo contract. Word went around that Queen Victoria had declared that indigo need not be sown. Eden action came as support to the rebellion. Government brought in military to protect the condition. Commission held planters guilty and declared that indigo production was not profitable for riots. They were asked to continue the existing contract but can refuse for future. After the revolt, indigo production collapsed in Bengal, but the planters now shifted their operation to Bihar. With the discovery of synthetic dyes in the late 19th century, their business was severely affected. When Mahatma Gandhi returned from South Africa, a peasant from Bihar persuaded him to visit Champaran and see the plight of the indigo cultivators there. Mahatma Gandhi's visit in 1917 marked the beginning of the Champaran movement against the indigo planters. So, we have come to the end of this chapter, ruling the countryside. Now, we will see some important questions for this chapter, ruling the countryside. First question is, what were the benefits reaped by the East India Company as the Diwan of Bengal? So now we are going to see, after East India Company got the Diwani rights, what are the various benefits were received by the East Indian Company? So the answer for this question is, with the appointment as a Diwan, the company became the chief financial administrator of Bengal. The company could now administer the land and revenue resources of Bengal and could utilize the revenue to meet the expenses of the company. Now, the company has the liberty to trade in all the goods it wanted to. Second question, what is permanent settlement? As we saw in the starting of the video, the permanent settlement concentrates on the zamindari system. So the permanent settlement was introduced in the year 1793. By the terms of the settlement, the Rajas and Talukdars were recognized as zamindars. They were asked to collect rent from the peasants and pay revenue to the company. The amount to be paid was fixed permanently, that is, it was not to be increased ever in future. It was felt that this would ensure a regular flow of revenue into the company's coffer and at the same time encourage the zamindars to invest in improving the land. Question. Give a brief description about Ryotwari system. The Ryotwari system was introduced by Captain Alexander Red. This system was further developed by Thomas Munro. According to the new system, the revenue was to be collected directly from the farmers or ryots. This was necessary as the zamindari system was not prevalent in the southern regions. The lands of each farmer were separately assessed and the revenue was fixed accordingly. This system was also known as the Munro system. Fourth question. Why did the British want to grow the indigo plant in India? The indigo plant grows primarily in the tropics and this was the primary reason for the British to turn to India for the growth of the indigo plant. In the 13th century, Indian indigo was being used by cloth manufacturers in Italy, France and Britain to dye the cloth. Because the demand for Indian indigo grew, as European cloth manufacturers wanted only the Indian indigo as it produced a rich blue color. Due to this demand, the price of the Indian indigo rose in the European market and mediated the British to grow more indigo in the Indian soil. Another reason was industrialization of Britain, as this resulted in the expansion of cotton production, creating an enormous new demand for cloth dyes. Indigo production in other countries began to decline and the demand for Indian indigo increased in European countries. This demand made the East India Company to expand the area under indigo cultivation. Fifth question. What were the two major systems of indigo cultivation in India? Answer is, the two major systems of indigo cultivation in India were the NIJ system of cultivation and the Rioti system of cultivation. Sixth question. Give a brief description of the method of producing indigo dye. Answer is, the indigo leaves were fermented in a steeping vat. Then the liquid was extracted and oxidized in a beating vat. Finally, a blue precipitate was allowed to form from the liquid in a settling vat. This precipitate was collected, dried and compacted. This dried compacted material is the indigo dye. Seventh question. When did Blue Rebellion break out? Indian farmers rebelled against being forced to grow indigo plants. In March 1859, thousands of ryots in Bengal refused to grow indigo. This was known as the Blue Rebellion. Eighth question. What was the outcome of the Blue Rebellion? After the Blue Rebellion, indigo production collapsed in Bengal. Planters shifted their operation to Bihar. Now we will see the ninth question. What is common in the two prints? A Kalamkari print and a Morris cotton print. Answer is, both use a rich blue color commonly known as indigo. Tenth question. Who was William Morris? Answer. He was a famous poet and artist of 19th century of Britain. He designed a floral cotton print known as Morris cotton print. Next question, number 11. What is Kalamkari print? Answer. Kalamkari print is created by weavers of Andhra Pradesh in India. 12th question. Explain the Rioti system in detail. Answer. Under the Rioti system, the planters force the Riots to sign a contract and agreement. They pressurize the village headmen to sign the contract on behalf of the Riots. Those who signed the contract got cash advances from the planters at low rates of interest to produce indigo. Under the Riot system, the planters forced the Riots to sign a contract and agreement. Those who signed the contract got cash advances from the planters at low rates of interest to produce indigo. But the loan committed the Riot to cultivate indigo at least 25% of the area under his holding. That means 25% of the land has to be cultivated for indigo crop. The planter provided the seed and the drill, while the cultivators prepared the soil, sowed the seed, and looked after the crop. When the crop was delivered to the planter after the harvest, a new loan was given to the Riot and the cycle started all over again. The price they got for the indigo they produced was very low and the cycle of loans never ended. So activity questions. The first question is write the various steps of producing the indigo. That is, you have to write the various procedure or the process which is required for preparing an indigo blue dye. So if you see the chapter 3 ruling the countryside PDF, you will be able to find out how was indigo produced. So under that topic, there is a clear explanation given. So you have to take it and write down the important points which is necessary for the process of producing the indigo. The next activity is you have to find out the meanings for 10 hard words in this chapter. For this, you have to refer the PDF of this lesson. I will give you the link for the PDF of this chapter. So please refer to the chapter in the PDF format and you have to find out the important hard words and you have to write the meaning for that. Thank you. So this is the link given for History Class 8, Chapter number 3, Ruling the Countryside. So you can click on this link and see, or you can go to the Chrome browser, search for the chapter number 3, History, Ruling the Countryside. So please download the PDF book of this chapter for your reference.